Chapter 1, A Beautiful Wife. I can't remember how, when, or where I met Leah. It was a long time ago, and my memory isn't the best, but I think I met her first in a big old city near the Rhine in Germany. She told me that she came from an ancient family, but I never knew the name of the woman who was my friend, my partner in my studies, and finally my wife. Why didn't I ever discover her family name? Maybe she didn't want me to find out, but I can't remember. I do remember one thing very well: Leah was tall and slim. Later on, at the end, she was very thin, and her movements were quiet and aristocratic. The strange softness of her footsteps was something I'll never forget. When she came into my office, I only knew she was there when I heard her voice or when she put her white hand on my shoulder. She had a beautiful face, but it wasn't a classical kind of beauty. There was something strange about it, and I've often tried to understand why. Was it her pure white skin or her thick black hair? I looked at her long, delicate nose many times, and it was perfect. I looked at her sweet mouth, and how soft and red it was. She smiled, her teeth were white, and then I looked into her eyes. They were much bigger than normal eyes, and sometimes, when she was excited, they looked like a deer's eyes, black with long black eyelashes and black eyebrows. But as I looked into them, I realized that they had a strange expression. I thought about it for many hours, sometimes all night. What was the expression in those eyes? I wanted to know. Many times, I thought I almost had the answer, but then it was gone. Leah was very determined. She was always calm and quiet, but her determination. Her eyes showed a terrible energy that sometimes frightened me. Leah was very clever. She was excellent at Latin and Greek and knew many other languages perfectly. She never made a mistake. She was also a student of science and mathematics. When we were first married, I often asked her for help with my studies and we worked together. But after she died, I was alone without her. I felt like a child in the dark. When she first became ill, she did not come to help me as often as before. She lost weight and her skin became pale. When I saw that she was dying, I felt desperate. Leah was so strong and fought so hard to live. She was determined. I watched in agony as she fought for her life. I knew she loved me, but I only understood how much she loved me now that she was dying. She held my hands and said that she was devoted to me. I cannot talk about it now, but let me say that her love for me was part of her determination to live on the night she died. She suddenly got out of bed and cried, "Oh God, must I die? Must I lose my fight with death? No, I can't die like this." But my dear Leah died. I was so sad. I just couldn't stay in the old city by the river for a few months. I traveled around, and then I bought an old house in an isolated part of England. This dark, sad place expressed my feelings of loneliness, but I decorated it with beautifully colored curtains, carpets, and ornaments. I thought that the bright colors would make me feel happier, but unfortunately, they didn't. I began to drink too much, but I don't want to speak about that time of my life. I will only say that one day I married Lady Rowena Trevanion of Trane. My new wife had blonde hair and blue eyes. She was very different from my first wife, but I couldn't help but think of Leah. I took Lady Rowena back to a room high up in the tower of the abbey where we lived for the first month of our marriage. The room was very large with an enormous window made of glass from Venice. The ceiling was high like a church, and in the center, there was a big gold chandelier. There were sofas from the East and an Indian bed on the walls. The walls were covered in long tapestries like carpets with designs made of gold. The tapestries moved every time that the wind blew, and my dear wife was afraid of me because I was often sad and depressed. She didn't love me much and stayed away from me, but I was okay with that. I always thought about Leah, my beautiful Leah, who had passed away. Sometimes, in my dreams, I called to her at night. I imagined that perhaps my love for her could bring her back to me. At the beginning of the second month, Lady Rowena became ill. She didn't sleep very well and told me she could hear sounds and movements in the tower. "You have a fever," I said. "You're imagining things." She got better, but then she went back to bed with a second illness, which was worse than the first. The doctors couldn't understand it. Rowena began to hear little sounds and movements in the bedroom, which frightened her. One night at the end of September, she woke up suddenly. I was sitting on a sofa by her bed. She whispered to me that she could hear sounds and see movements. There was a frightened expression on her thin face. But I saw and heard nothing. I explained, "It's the wind." Her face was white with fear, and I suddenly fainted. I remembered that there was some wine on the table on the other side of the room as I walked under the light of the chandelier. A strange thing happened. I felt something invisible pass me, and on the carpet, I saw a shadow, almost the shadow of a shadow. I decided to say nothing to Rowena. I poured out a glass of wine and gave it to her, then I sat on the sofa and watched her. After some moments, I heard very quiet footsteps on the carpet coming towards the bed. A second later, as Rowena was about to drink the wine, I saw, or perhaps I heard, something that made me think of the shadow I had seen on the carpet. I had a strange dream. I saw 3 or 4 large drops of a bright red liquid fall into the glass. Rowena didn't see it. She drank the wine, and I didn't say anything because I thought it was only my imagination. After this, Rowena's health got much worse. On the third night, she died. Her servants prepared her for the tomb and covered her with a sheet. The next night, I sat alone with her body in the bedroom. Strange forms and shadows moved around me. I looked nervously into the dark corners at the moving tapestries and felt frightened. Then I looked at the carpet under the chandelier was completely empty, and I felt a little better when I looked at Rowena on the bed. Sad memories of Leah, the only woman I ever loved, came back to me. It was around midnight when I heard a sound. It was quiet but clear, and it woke me from my dreams. I thought it came from the bed, so I listened in terror, but I did not hear it again. I looked carefully at Rowena for any sign of life. She was not moving, but I continued to look at her for a few minutes. Then I noticed a little color in Rowena's face. My heart stopped in horror. I couldn't move when I realized that Rowena was still alive. I tried to revive her, but her color quickly disappeared from her cheeks. Her face looked like marble again, and her lips were thin with the horrible expression of death. When her body was cold and rigid, I fell onto the sofa and dreamed about Leah. An hour later, I heard the same sound as before. I listened, and sure enough, there it was again, a sigh from the bed. I ran over and saw clearly that her lips were trembling. Then they opened, showing her bright teeth. I thought I was going mad. There was a pink color. Her cheeks and neck were getting warm again, and her heart was beating a little faster. Thank goodness, Lady Rowena was alive. I did everything I could to revive her, but then, suddenly, her color disappeared, her heart stopped, and her body became cold and rigid. I sat down and began to think about Leah again. Then, for the third time, there was a sound from the bed. Why must I describe the horrors of that night again? I tried to revive Rowena, and each time, she seemed to fight with an invisible force and her body changed. I cannot say more. I couldn't believe my eyes. Rowena was looking so much better. It was almost dawn when she moved again. I was sitting on the sofa, exhausted, but Rowena's body was moving with more energy than before. Her color had returned, and her eyes were open. She looked so alive. Then, she suddenly got out of bed and walked slowly to the center of the room. It was like she was walking in her sleep. I was so surprised, I didn't even tremble or move. I was as cold and still as stone, paralyzed by what I saw. My head was filled with wild thoughts. Was Rowena really alive? Could I really see her? Her blonde hair and blue eyes. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I saw her mouth, and her cheeks were like pink roses. Rowena's cheeks. She was taller than before, but not as tall as I remembered. I was filled with a kind of madness. I ran to her, but she moved away. Then I saw. Her long hair was moving in the wind, and it was blacker than the black of midnight. Then, slowly, her eyes opened. I couldn't help but shout like a madman, "Oh, my love!" These are the black eyes of Leah English, 5-Day Story. The voiceover in this video is given by English, 5 Days. Copying or we kindly ask that you refrain from uploading any content. We'll be taking further action as soon as we notice, but we want to give you a heads up that we'll be doing so without any kind of pre-notice. Thanks for your understanding.